Everyone, I'm Ben Sweat from LevinPro HC. I'm here at the McGuire Woods Conference in Chicago, and I'm joined by Matt Wolf from Elliott Davis. Matt, thank you for stopping by today. It's great to have you here. Would you mind starting by just kind of giving an overview of what you do at Elliott Davis and then the kind of services that you provide?
Yeah, happy to. So Elliott Davis is a full-service transaction advisory sort of investment to optimization to exit consulting firm. We also offer audit and tax solutions focused by industry. I lead the valuation practice, deep focus on healthcare throughout my career, and we really do go to market by industry, focused on the middle market and lower middle market services, again by industry, on that full investment optimization exit spectrum.
And are there particular healthcare sectors that you focus on specifically?
You know, as a firm, we have a lot of expertise and experience in DSOs, infusion, areas of behavioral health. But other than that, I would say we kind of see it all, particularly on the physician-led outpatient type of area of the continuum of care.
Yeah, right. Well, let's just continue with the PPM space. So we at LevinPro HC track the M&A in the physician group space,
Yes.
and it has been incredibly active the last several years. But physicians and PE firms with platforms are faced with the decision constantly of whether to buy in the M&A market or whether to kind of build through more organic growth. So can you take me through that decision-making process and what factors they have to consider into making that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the factors are very similar if you're a PE-backed PPM or physician-owned, and there are many of them still that exist that are physician-owned and are
still a fragmented industry.
Absolutely. And it is ultimately kind of a make versus buy decision. The key thing to remember is that they're constrained by labor, more so than most other industries, right? Unlike a software solution technology company, you can't expand into a new area without being there physically. You can't just add a product to a platform. Like a PPM business, if you want to expand in a marketplace, you are constrained by the labor. So what does the labor market look like? And that actually varies significantly by specialty, I think, as everybody sort of intuitively knows, but interesting statistics exist about the mobility of physicians. Depending on the specialty, as many as 70% of them still practice in the same metro area where they completed their residency. And so the availability of labor in terms of hanging up a shingle and trying to set up a new practice, that can play a factor. The capital intensiveness of that is another factor. Where are you buying exam tables and painting a waiting room, or do you also need endoscopy machines and imaging equipment or things like that? And that capital outlay, particularly for independent physician practices, can be fairly daunting. I think we've worked with a lot of groups where they see the growth from private equity-backed physician practices, and they, as maybe a 10, 20, 30 doc practice, say, well, we want to create some of that value ourselves. We want to capture that value ourselves without taking institutional money. But it becomes a very difficult capital allocation problem for a group of owners who have historically paid out every dollar above their expenses as a distribution to partners, or to physician owners. So how do you think about that? Get buy-in from physicians to make that investment, to go into these new markets, new specialties, do something new, and really think about it differently in a way that just physicians didn't think about it before.
Well, what markets or maybe what specialties does it make sense to grow organically and not through M&A?
It's a really great question, and I think it varies by the geography, right? So I mentioned the availability of physicians in that marketplace is key, but also just the demographic tailwinds. How easy is it to set up? And I think it's really going to look differently for each group. Ultimately, it is a capital allocation question. The general trade-offs are, all right, if we buy this, we might cash flow it faster, right? We won't experience that same ramp up in terms of how long before we start to generate profits from that investment, but you got to come up with the money somewhere. One trend that I've seen too that sort of leans, I think, more into organic growth is new tools and technologies that physician practices are relying on. And the more specialized and unique the tools that you as a practice are using, the more difficult it can be to onboard a physician practice that you acquire into those tools. And I think especially with the growing prevalence of AI tools, even on the administrative side or just the sort of clinically adjacent space, bringing in a large group of physicians and saying, okay, well, for this to work, you need to use these tools that we use, and to onboard 10 physicians onto that platform in a way that generates income quickly enough to pay for the cost of that capital can be very challenging.
Yeah, how well received is that? And is there any attrition from the physicians as a result of that transition?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's been the big story of PPM investing, since interest rates increased in 2022, really starting in 2023, because historically the acquisition premise that buy was, we will acquire you, we might coordinate some of our back office practices, you stay on your systems, you do this the way you've done it forever, and you'll make more money and everybody will win. And now it's saying, well, that's not quite good enough anymore. Physicians need to be working on the same platforms, using the same tools to really drive the ROI and create that value. And it can be very difficult. I mean, change management is hard, regardless of the organizations. It can be daunting with physicians and physician practice management, especially because those independent groups are independent because they want to be independent. They don't want anybody telling them to use this tool or that tool. Here's the new process, ignore the old process.
That's not why they got into medicine.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely right. That's not why they got into medicine. That's not, I mean, if they wanted to do that, they would just go work for the hospital.
Yeah.
So it is definitely a difficult balance.
Well, do physicians, in your experience, favor getting acquired by a PE group, like an established PE group, or an established health system or hospital? Would they have a preference?
I think most of the independent physicians would prefer neither, it seems like now. But I think a lot of it comes down to who do they think is going to give them more leverage and more control over what they do. And if they're a physician group that is large enough to be considered a platform PPM for that private equity group, that's generally the preference, right? Because if they're the first deal, then they have more control. They don't want to necessarily be the tuck-in, because that's kind of how they view being acquired by the hospital.
Yeah.
And to that end, I've seen a lot of physician practices who look at it and say, well, we think inevitably we're going to need to either be acquired by private equity or partner up with a hospital or health system in the long term. So in the short and medium term, the play is, let's expand, make ourselves big enough that when that eventuality comes, we have leverage to either be the platform for that PE group or to negotiate the kind of deal with the hospital we want.
So maybe organically grow first.
Yeah.
And then exit through.
Well, and depending on the economics of it, if you are that independent group, you can say, well, we're at 10 docs, we want to get at 50 docs maybe before we have to make that choice between PE or the hospital. There are opportunities to acquire smaller practices on your way to that level. It just requires a different thought process than many of those physicians are used to thinking, because again, they're used to paying out all of those distributions. So how do you sell that vision to your fellow physician owners that, all right, we're going to cut down on distributions a little bit, make these investments so that in X number of years, we're in a position to capitalize on the value that we create over the short and medium term.
Yeah.